About 2.5 years ago, in the 2016 campaign, it's like an endless, grueling schedule of campaign forums. And in many of the forums we talked about, they knew Jerry Dyer was going to retire as the chief of police of Fresno. How are we going to replace the chief? And I remember the one at St. Claret's Church, and they asked each of us to make a promise about how we're going to do it. And I promised that we'd have a comprehensive, transparent process. And I'm delivered my promise of probably the most comprehensive, transparent process ever to select the chief of police for the city of Fresno. So we're going to have 5 community forums. This is the 4th of 5 throughout the entire city, allowing all of our citizens to have a direct voice in who our next chief is going to be. And you'll see these questions up here. What challenges do you see the chief to address? What issues facing the police chief should be understood? What qualities are the most important to the chief of police? Is there anything else the city manager consider when selecting the chief of police? So you're going to weigh directly on all of these, just like the other forums. We also have an online version in English, Spanish, and Hmong, where people can go online, answer the same questions, so everybody has an opportunity to weigh in on who our next chief is. All this will culminate in about 2 more weeks. By the end of May, we're going to take all the information from the forums, all the information we had from online. We're to compile this data, and we're going to give it to the recruiting company we hired to do a national search for the next chief of police. Now, there will be some really great local candidates that will probably apply, at least probably 4 or 5, but it's going to be a total search. The goal is to hire the new chief by September. The old chief, who's been the chief for 18 years, 40 years in the city of Fresno, will retire in October. We'd like to have at least a 1-month overlap. Once this thing is initiated in June, we anticipate probably 2 or 3 interview panels that will eventually bring it down to probably 3 final candidates. And then in the end, myself, through the city manager, will make the final determination. This is extremely important. Who we select as the next chief of police will have a direct impact on everybody's quality of life. So take it serious, I take it serious, and thank you for coming. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Jackie Riles.
Thank you, Mayor. So let me add my thanks for your being here this evening. I'm going to add something about the survey. There are hard copies of the survey by the door. Do I have it upside down? Yes, I do. There are hard copies of the survey, and even if you give some input, you talk this evening, or you've gone online, you may think of something, so maybe you want to take one of these along, and you'll have an opportunity to continue to give input, because that will continue until it stops. Mayor mentioned that there's a recruiting company. In a couple of the other meetings, the question was asked, are they present? They're not, but CMAC, as you heard, is recording everything. And that's part of the reason that it's important to speak at the microphones, because the recruiting company is watching all of these. So they will hear every bit of testimony and every bit of input, as well as review all the other input. So as Jaime and the mayor mentioned, there are 4 particular areas. We're not confined to those, but we want to make sure that there's as much input as we can get on these 4 areas, and then there'll be opportunity if you want to input otherwise. But in terms of just structure and making sure, number 1, that we get input on these areas, and number 2, that everybody has an opportunity to talk, what I'd like to do is say that what are the challenges in the city that you would like the new police chief to address? We have microphones up here. I'm going to invite you to come up and say your thoughts about what you think the challenges are that you would like the new police chief to address. Anybody ready to talk about that? Please come forward. Microphones right here and here. Good, very good.
Gloria Hernandez, 32, is it on?
It is.
Yeah.
Speak right into it, please, Claudia.
Okay, 3232 East Hedges.
Thank you.
I have many, based on my interactions with the Fresno Police Department. Do not let Dyer influence a decision by insisting someone inside the department gets the chief of police position. Stop criminalizing the poor, the homeless, and the youth and the immigrants. Stop racist bias policies. He did a towing policy that added $40 administrative fee, and I did a Public Records Act request, and I learned that a lot of immigrants' cars were taken, and $40 is a lot of money. So we want the new police chief to not do racist policies like that, And that goes along to, like, stop making money. Do your job, police us. Don't make money off of us. No political endorsements. We're sick and tired of hearing him push only certain class of people. Office morale, that was raised at the last meeting. I'd like to see what about community morale, because we certainly don't trust him. Understand the mentally ill. I'll give you an example. As a mental health advocate, I'm not here as an advocate, I'm here as Gloria Hernandez, but as an advocate, I've seen where the copycat student wannabe shooters, I see them go into the behavior health from Clovis, but here in Fresno, we take them to juvenile. So I'm really concerned that the police department understand that these are kids and they're gonna mimic other kids. Stop lying to the families of unsolved murders. He's told us to our face that the majority of the cases have been solved. We were at a meeting where at least 10 people that I know have family members that the murders have not been solved. Follow the Minneapolis, eliminate the fear-based training. This police chief is gonna have input into the regional training center. We gotta stop teaching them to fear for their life, but to actually focus on building meaningful relationship with the people. Minneapolis just did that, and they have a whole curriculum on that. So if you stop fearing the people, you can actually do your job. And if FPD purchases an application, they should use it. I was on the chief's advisory board when he purchased the early warning system, alert warning system, where cops go bad. It didn't work with Foster. So if you're gonna get an application, use it. Even out the checkpoints. I asked him once, why don't you do checkpoints at the tailgate parties and not just at Cinco de Mayo or 16th of September? He told me because it was a traffic problem. Hello? So it's a revenue situation, and I wanted to stop. I wanted to actually solve crimes, and not by declaring war on our communities. Every other campaign he has, he does war. Declares wars on gangs. Stop the gang injunctions. That just sets our kids up to go to the prison. In Anaheim, they got rid of them, and they actually got community policing. Stop testifying in public by talking bad about victims of officer-involved shootings. You're prejudging the jury. You're setting up the jury to already go and talk bad. You shouldn't be talking about that. Talk about the incident and only the incident. Stop embarrassing us. Stop listening and pretending you know it all. Some of us in the community actually know something. It took me 14 years to convince him to do the mental health training. 14 years. In those 14 years, I lost 6 people, clients. So I want to be heard. I want to be able to sit at the table and negotiate with an open heart, because I'm not going there just to criticize. I go with solutions. Mm-hmm. And I always think outside the box. And I think I'm very good at thinking outside the box. He's adopted some of my policies. That's the other concern I have. Will the new chief of police continue the policy on not working with the immigration? Because it took us a long time to pass that, and I'm very concerned. The other thing, as a mental health advocate, I'm really concerned that the 5150 everybody, they can actually ask people to go voluntary. And the reason I talk about it is because it's affecting a lot of the immigrants, the refugees. Because when they finally end up trying to adjust their status, it's going to be used against them as mentally dividend. How do you say the word?
Deficient?
Yeah, or, are you the man?
Or what?
Dividend, I was right, dividend.
Oh, sorry.
So I want to make sure that when they do the training, that they also offer the person a volunteer into the crisis unit instead of 5150 and everybody. I do want to comment that since they got the training on the 5150s and they learned what happens after the 5150, I've seen better written 5150s, so I do want to say that. I am good at telling people when they do a good job, and I am willing to do that. But in my I mean, I was arguing with Winchester before Dyer got in. And I really think, and one of the things I argue with Winchester is, why did they take all the budget? You know, just like when we were working for the parks to try to get the parks up, nobody asked me as a taxpayer if I wanted to pay for the regional training center. That didn't get out to the community. We didn't vote on that. So I think he needs to, the chief of police needs to step back and understand that the community is standing up, the community is tired of it, and we want more parks. And if they're going to be doing training, they should not just do implicit training, but they should do culturally biased training.
All right.
Because it's not happening. He does not know the difference between a Chicano, a Mexicano, a Tejano, and an immigrant. We're all treated the same, and I'm tired. I pay taxes, and I demand the best for my people.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for speaking directly to the microphone. That's all captured. We're still on the question, what are the challenges in the city that you would like the new police chief to address? Is there another person that would like to speak to this? Any comments on that? Yes. If you wish, you don't have to.
Hi, I'm Kay Randolph Pollard, and I live at 2956 East Brown. And I'm new back to Fresno, lived here the last 2 years, but grew up in the San Joaquin Valley and Fresno area, moved to the Bay Area for the 20 years. I think what I'm seeing since I've been back is there is no real community policing effort in this community, as the former person spoke earlier. I've seen that in communities I've lived in make a difference to really address the needs of the citizens that live in each neighborhood. Each neighborhood is very different in how people live and how people interact, and you have to, police departments have to learn to work within those communities. I've also seen, when I first got here, I got a parking ticket because I didn't know I lived in a district where a meter person would drive by my residential area. And my tags were expired. They weren't on there, but we had paid the registration and not received the tags. And it took me, I thought I could go to like one of the community police centers to get some help. And it took me 3 locations to attend to find someone who could assist me in my neighborhood, and I had to track someone down the hall. There was no one at the public desk that would take and receive my information or question. And so I found, again, with community policing, you weren't really getting someone to help. I think also, Fresno does have crime, but at the same time, crime isn't just addressed by enforcement. Crime is addressed by a combination of enforcement and community-based policing, as well as trauma-informed care training for police officers, and a variety of other training that can go hand in hand to make sure that it's meeting all the needs of its people of the differences. Fresno is so multicultural, and mental health is a huge issue. Homelessness here is a huge issue. And if you're not coordinating and collaborating with the county or bringing on your own internal resources to help support what the county can't provide with homeless population who might have drug issues or mental health issues where they're self-medicating, you have a revolving circle you can never get ahead of. So there's got to be some creative way to try to find a way to get ahead of that in housing solutions, mental health on the street, drug treatment on the street, to try and help folks find the services that they need. They're there because there's no other niche in the community that's meeting their needs. And then they're providing other issues that could be criminal in nature that then affect the police department and the citizens as well. But they're humans, they're individuals that live here, and they need to be supported in some way. And the most expensive way is to throw them in jail and to create other issues for them. There's a lot smarter way to spend our money to help support those citizens in the community. So those are the things that I've noticed since I've been back and are concerning to me that I'd like to see addressed.
All right, thank you very much. Challenges you'd like the new chief to address? Yes.
Uno de los desafíos que quisiera que la policía atendiera es el idioma español, porque no hay mucha ayuda en eso. Tarda mucho a la policía en responder cuando uno está hablando español.
Como ellos no tienen audífonos,
Oh, ok.
una frase y luego los
Ok. Ajá.
So one of the problems that I see, or one of the challenges that I see with the Fresno Police or the Chief of Police, is the issue of them not speaking Spanish or not understanding the Spanish culture.
Thank you, yes.
Quisiéramos una atención de calidad, porque yo creo que todos tenemos el derecho de que se nos resuelva cualquier crimen que se nos cometa.
We would like the quality of knowing that. Una vez más?
Que queremos atención de calidad.
We want quality attention.
Yo ya he tenido 4 casos de crimen.
I've had 4 cases of criminal activity.
La primera fue, rompieron el vidrio de mi carro en la calle.
The first one was they broke my car window on the street.
La segunda fui asaltada, quitaron mi bolsa con todo mi dinero en un parque.
The next time I was robbed, they took my bag, my purse in a park,
Y ese fue un crimen planeado.
and that was a
Yeah.
planned crime.
La tercera fue en el estacionamiento de mi apartamento, también volvieron a quebrar el vidrio y quisieron abrir la puerta del garage.
The third time they tried to open my garage door in my apartment complex.
Y la cuarta fue de que tuve un disparo de bolitas como de juego, no sé, pero rompieron mi vidrio.
The fourth time they had shot something at my window.
Ajá. Ni uno de esos 4 crímenes tuve yo alguna respuesta de que se solucionó algo. No tuve respuesta sobre esos crímenes.
Neither of those crimes did I have, was it resolved, or did I hear anything back in regards to those crimes?
No a todos pedí respuesta, pero a 2 hablé y me dijeron, nada más lo que me decían es, tal policía tiene tu caso, pero ahorita no se encuentra.
Only 2 of those 4 complaints did I want a response for, and when I would call, they would say an officer, they would name an officer, and the officer, they would say that that officer had her case.
Les dejé mi número de teléfono, les dejé mi dirección y yo quise que me resolvieran mi caso porque en el segundo caso perdí mucho dinero, perdí mis identificaciones.
So I would call, and then the second case, I lost a lot. I lost my IDs and license and personal information. And money.
Siento que a las personas hispanas, o al menos que hablamos español, no nos ponen suficientemente atención y no nos resuelven los casos como en otras comunidades, en otras razas.
I feel as being Hispanic or Hispanic Latino, they are not giving us the proper attention or the attention that other races get throughout the city.
Y yo pido que haya más atención de calidad para las personas hispanas también.
And I ask that there is more quality attention to the Hispanic race.
Gracias. Other thoughts on challenges that the new police chief would face?
Hello, my name is Eduardo Navarro, and I think the
Wanna
biggest challenge.
Put that up a little bit for you.
That's good. It'll be
Great,
good,
great.
it'll be
All
good. The biggest challenge, I think, is trust. I think that'd be the biggest challenge because sometimes a lot of the community feels like the police can't be trusted. And just incidents where, in my neighborhood where we've had to call the police and they tell the neighbor, well, your neighbor called us over here. So now it's like a neighborhood. My neighbor across the street now says, okay, well, why are you calling the cops? It's like, well, how did you know it was us? Well, the cops told us. So now I got someone across the street that I'm going to have problems with. And where are the police? Every day. And they might come down the street, but they're not there every day. So I think the biggest issue is trust and also accountability. I mean, I know there's certain things that certain cops do, and they have a really tough job, but it seems like they're not being held accountable. If I did the same exact thing, or anybody else did, we'd be held accountable. So I think the police chief needs to, show that she or him will be willing to do that, be able to hold officers accountable for their actions on how they treat people human, not like, and I know it's tough, and it's like they come right out of training, hard, fast, and pushing, but it's like they come out with gang mentality, and they end up acting like gang members. And so when you push, what are you going to get back? You're going to get pushing. So it's kind of like not everybody's bad. There are bad ones. Work together to try to get the bad ones out. So I think that's one of the major challenges.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your comments. Other comments on that question? We have 3 additional questions. Hope you're looking at those and seeing where your ideas are. This is challenges in the city you would like the chief to address. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. So from the first question, a challenge in our city that the new police chief needs to understand is our city has a history of pain. And so as we hear people speak today, we're going to hear a whole lot of pain. And part of it is the fact that there is distrust between the community and the police in general. And if we look back, as the community, we'll have many reasons why. And so the chief has to be able to empathize with the community and the whole police force. And so them as the leader, they really have a big job ahead of them. But it's so much more than that. When we talk about community policing, we talk about 21st century community policing, there's knowledgeable people who know exactly what that means. And so as we push to hold them accountable, there has to be a midway. So as the police chief, as the sergeants, as everybody who's a part of the police, we all have to agree on one thing, that we are one community, and the only way we push past pain is together. And so that's definitely one thing I want to start the conversation with, but also I feel like our policing matters have kind of been more intervention instead of prevention. And so when I say things like that, because of how the city budget, a lot of it is given towards the police, and I mean, they have their reasons why they want so much money, but in the same breath, a lot of the policing that is done is intervention, where we have very well-equipped community-based programs that can help with prevention. And so instead of us trying to arrest a bunch of children or a bunch of youth, we kept them off track. And so we don't have to deal with that issue. We have plenty of mentors, we have mentoring groups, we have so much, this community, everything in this community we don't need anything else. We just need to access the things in our community right now, and with that, we together can get out of this pain. So that's one thing I definitely want to address as well, is the financial burden that the police take from the budget is helpful, but not as helpful as it could be. So we really need to have these conversations before the chief even comes in. Honestly, I would love to see us be able to have a town hall with whoever top 3 candidates are. Because these are things that we need to know before they're in office. We don't want to wait for them to be in office and say, oh, well, we don't agree with that. We want to know before they get into office, hey, these are the things that we know we need. Whether you're from Fresno or not, we need these specific things. And if they can't agree to that, then honestly, that's not a good pick. So I would love to see a more inclusive process. Yes, we're answering questions here, but we won't know if these questions get answered if they just randomly pick a person. Am I right? So we need to see these people ahead of time and have these conversations, and honestly put them in a pickle to see how they handle pressure, because this city is full of pressure. And we need to be able to trust them from the get-go. If we're talking about trust, we need to see that from the get-go, both ways. So that being said, I would love to see a process that includes whoever maybe the top 3 candidates are, and also just open conversation between, not after the fact when something happens, before things happen, so that it really feels like an inclusive process of not just selecting the police chief, but even having comments on what policies are to take place. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments on this question?
Hi, my name is Nia. I'm with Communities for New California, CNC. We're an outreach company, our community organization. But my question was, so 80% of our money goes to the police budget in Fresno, and that's where I feel the challenge is at, because I don't feel that we're getting 80% of it in our city. We don't show 80% of progress in our city. We don't show, and that's where 80% of our money is going to. So I would have wanted to see that that situation change. I would want to see a lot of that budget money go towards things that are more important to me, like the potholes in Fresno and the trees that are coming down from the wind that we didn't get picked up after weeks of them being on our streets. And that money that, you know, they're driving around in BMWs and things like that and getting new cars every yearly, that money could be going to such more important things that happen in Fresno than to go just to our police budget. Just like Gloria said, that $40 tax that was going on people's cars that were getting towed, that's another thing. You know, where's all this money going? Because there's so many cars that are being towed, and where's all this money going? Because it sure is not going back into Fresno, because I don't see it going back into Fresno, and Jerry has nothing showing anything like that going back into Fresno. It seems like everything went to his pocket. And so I don't want our next chief of police to have that same situation or that same mentality of thinking that it's a more financial gain for them for their retirement than to actual help the community in Fresno, because that's what's more important and that's what their job is. One of the other things I wanted to say was, you know, when did the police start becoming predators and we started becoming prey? I feel like we are prey to them and that they are always constantly out to attack us or to try to put us in jail, take our vehicles away, you know, disrupt our families, you know, put us in situations that we somehow are going to be tragic to a family and a community instead of being, like he said, helpful to our community and helping us get out of situations. I think a lot of it has to do with who's the head man in charge, which is Jerry Dyer, and he hasn't showed that at all, so all his minions are following behind him and not doing that same thing also. So I would want to see that police chief person be more empathetic to the community and what's going on, and understanding that the challenge is not for the police budget to be 80%, but for our city to have 80% progress done into it. That was pretty much it.
All right, thank you very much. I see another hand. I have someone coming right from the back. Hang on just one second. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gloria, and I live in Northeast Fresno, and I can't make Thursday's meeting, so I'm here today. But I did want to echo some of the comments that were made earlier today about the enormous amount of ticketing going on in the poorer neighborhoods, and I say that very directly because I do have my father and some of my family members who live in Southeast Fresno. And here's the thing, I live in Northeast Fresno. My husband and I are walkers. We see people speeding down Granville and Perrin all the time. We cannot find a police officer anywhere at any time. And those are the people that can really afford to pay those moving violations, not the people in Southeast Fresno. They're getting ticketed for a bad light. Their tags have not been renewed, obviously, probably because they can't afford it. And then you ticket them, and then they don't show up for court. And then it's just one thing after another. And I can tell you that I'm a retired court employee, and I maintain friendships and relationships with judges on the bench right now. And they tell me that they see this. I don't know what they're doing out there. I don't know why they're ticketing these poor people who can't afford to pay these tickets. They either fail to show or they tell the court, we can't afford the tags. We couldn't afford this, much less the tickets. So it makes absolutely no sense to continue to ticket people for moving violations that, number one, they can't even afford to fix, especially something like a bad tail light or the lack of renewed tags. So yet in Northeast Fresno, you can't see a police officer anywhere. The other thing is, in Northeast Fresno, you get on the Nextdoor app, the people are always complaining about teenage drivers late at night, especially on the weekends, dragging through the streets, going 100 miles an hour off of Beheimer and Maple. Where are the cops? Once again, these are the people that can afford to pay the tickets. Now, I understand the question is, what are the challenges? Well, this challenge may be it. He is going to have to figure out how to balance its resources in a way that is conducive to each area and district. Because yes, I know there's higher crimes in different areas of the city. I'm not dumb, I can figure that out. But by the same token, there are other areas of town that aren't getting police resources and are being overlooked. And because they're being overlooked, they're going to town and doing whatever they want and getting away with it. And they're putting other people like my husband and I, who are walkers, at risk. I see rolling stops all the time. Maybe police officers live out there or something, I have no idea. That's one of the challenges I see. The other challenge is trust, like somebody else mentioned. There is a lot of lack of trust. And I'll be the first one to tell you that because I actually have family who are in law enforcement, and I have people who have been in jail. So I hear all the dialogue during the barbecues. So I get both sides, okay? So the other thing is there is a lack of trust in the community between the police department and everyday people. The other thing is the politics. The P for Parks, I don't know the status of that. I've been too upset to follow it anymore, but I'll tell you, the people of the city of Fresno voted for P for Parks, and it passed. And now we're getting pushback one way or another between all the ones that wanted it and the ones that didn't. Now, here's the problem I see with that. I know some people are not giving up, and I hope that they don't. And I will be there to support them, but I can't take the lead on this. But here's one other area that I see a problem with, is the police chief. I know he's a person, just like I am, a citizen, an everyday citizen, and he has rights. However, everybody knows who he is. None of the people here probably know who I am. So when I speak, people aren't likely to listen. But when the police chief does, even when he's not in uniform, everybody knows who he is. And the problem I have with that is he engages in too much politics, lately, and everybody knows who's in court right now, in trial. When I saw Chief Dyer go and not just once, twice, maybe 3 times condemn a certain state legislator who was being challenged or charged with a misdemeanor, it was like he was the judge and the jury, not just the police officer. Last time I checked, and the last thing I understood about law enforcement is they go out, they police the streets, they make an arrest, they turn it over to the DA's office. It is not the police chief's place to be the police officer, the judge, and the jury. And to me, it was intended to sway the public's opinion about this one state legislator. And I even told my husband, I would not be surprised if he's gonna go after that job after he gets that state legislator out. Watch. It wouldn't surprise me because I've been around politics long enough to recognize people's agenda. And to me, that was uncalled for. To go out and make his initial announcement, we arrested him based on this, fine. But to go on 2 or 3 times and go on and on and on about it, I think was unacceptable and unprofessional and unbecoming for a police chief. So all in all, I just hope that we do get someone who pays attention to the public, and that we do move forward, and hopefully we get someone that recognizes this is a very diverse community, and that we all should be respected and treated with respect, just like we need to treat them with respect. Being a police officer is a very, very dangerous job. We all recognize that. No one wants to see our police officers hurt, but we don't want to see our everyday citizens hurt either. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. We're here in the front row.
Hi, I'm Maria Eraña. I'm a resident of the Tower District for over 20 years. And I generally agree with what other speakers have shared, but I briefly want to point three of the challenges that I think are key. One is that the new chief needs to earn the respect and the trust of young people in Fresno. A majority of young people in Fresno are youth of color, and it's only going to grow. And unfortunately, my feeling has been all along that the city of Fresno and the police have a relationship of fear. They fear our young people instead of respecting them, and instead of trying to help understand where they're coming from. So I think that's a big challenge. How is the police department under the new chief gonna respect our youth and work with them in a constructive way rather than just, being heavy-handed? I've had experience in my family where, I have relatives who are young men of color, and in one case that I remember, just in one winter night, just because he was driving his car with his hoodie on, he was arrested, he was detained, thrown to the pavement, handcuffed, kept there with the food over his back. Because he was suspected of being a car thief, and then after half hour of being like that, he was, oh, sorry, it was another car. Well, don't they check the license plates or something like that? It just doesn't, to me, it's profiling, and that has to stop if you want to have a peaceful, respectful relationship with youth in Fresno. The second challenge is the use of lethal force. And I think that the new police chief needs to move away from this idea of having more SWAT team force, more militarization, no Humvees, no war equipment. It shouldn't be a confrontational relation like some other speakers already shared. I think also, people who are having mental health problems, or even people who committed a crime should not pay with the death penalty practically, There's ways in which these arrests can be handled that do not involve the use of lethal force, so they need better training, and they need to be held accountable when they make mistakes. So that's the second. And the third, I would say the new chief needs to learn how to work with limited resources, because it's not sustainable for the police department to be sucking up such a big chunk of the city's budget.
All right, thank you very much. Yes. As you're coming forward, please come forward to a microphone. I'm sort of looking, we're talking about challenges, issues facing the city that the chief should be aware of and understand. I think there's a lot of, we're hearing those as well. And then we'll look at qualities and other issues. So please, go ahead.
Thank you. My name's Rebecca Rangel, and I work with the Central California Criminal Justice Committee, have for the last 20 years. For the last 17 years, I've been on the Police Chiefs Advisory Board. I'm not going to badmouth Chief Dyer. I mean, for those of you who've been following him, you know what's going on. Sister, Gloria, that just spoke, the thing about him speaking up against Assemblyman Arambula was absolutely scandalous and completely unacceptable. And if you're not bothered by it, something's wrong. I would like to have our new police chief be educated. That's what I'd like to see. And while there are pros to having him be from our community, I think he needs to be from the outside, but he's got to be smart. By intelligent and smart, I mean be familiar with cultural diversity. Know what the needs are of the black community. This isn't brain surgery. He can get it. know what the problems, the issues, and challenges are with our Southeast Asian population and Latino population. Again, none of this is special intelligence. It's just that he's got to come in, he's got to study, he's got to have experience, or she even has to have experience. I'd like to have someone who has experience with dealing with people with mental health issues and not pretend that it's not an issue, because it's a monster issue. People in our community die as a result of police that don't know how to work with people with mental health issues. And last but certainly not least, I am painfully bothered by the way that we don't deal with homeless. It's like they're invisible. And it's, you know, it's not you right now, but it could be. So that's the package I'm looking for. Last but not least, from these 4 community gatherings, I would love, by a show of interest from the group, and not, no offense, Mayor Brand, but not handpicked by the mayor, 5 people or 3 people from each of those 4 meetings selected by the popularity or the being chosen by the group. For those 12 people to get to be involved in the interviewing, as this young man just said, of the candidates for chief, so that the community feels like we have had input into the selection of this individual. And then that way it feels like, well, maybe it wasn't you or you or you that was selected, but we know somebody that was part of that group. And then that way it kind of loans ownership, if that makes sense. Because we need to be involved in this process. We can't be outsiders. It's our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments? Please come forward. And we're sort of covering all these areas, but we want to make sure that we do cover all these areas.
So I'm from the 93725 Southeast Fresno area, but I spend most of my time here, going to school and work at the same time. And a lot of the issues that I have seen is, I've seen an increase and improvement in the rate of frequency by the police, but I haven't seen like an increase in quality policing by the police. So I see there's a large homeless population down in Tower, and I see them get 5150 real quick. They're out the next day. No effort to reintegrate, no effort for rehabilitation, getting a job, nothing like that. So it's sort of like, okay, get them arrested right now, put them out. And then another thing I want to identify is the issues of post-traumatic stress disorder that I see from a lot of the homeless population and youth. So it is like a really saturated area, being around a high school and being around a large homeless population. And I heard a lot of complaints about there not being a lot of policing in Northeast Fresno or Northwest Fresno, but it seems like this area specifically is very like saturated with police, and there's a high response, but like very little like to do with quality of policing, getting to understand like who they're talking to, what they're doing. So I'm not sure about like all the policies and law and all of that, but that's what I noticed. And I feel like he or she should take that into account.
Thank you very much. Other comments? Yes.
My name is Kimberly McCoy, and I live in a 93722 zip code. One of the challenges is that he or she is going to face is corruption in their own department. There's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of cover-up, and there's no accountability for it. Another issue that they're going to face is community policing. And when we talk about community policing, we're talking about it being the same all across Fresno, not just a certain way in Southeast Fresno and Southwest Fresno and then in Northwest Fresno. We want it to be the same all over Fresno. We want the same tactics all over Fresno. Another thing is that we want our police chief to keep the safety of the public first. Don't carry out his or she own agenda based off of what the former police chief has told them. Come in with an open mind, get to know your community, know who's in your community, and address the issues that they have. That's all I have to say on that question.
Thank you, Kimberly. Although we're kind of covering the area here, others, we are hearing about the challenges and the issues. There's also a question of qualities that are most important to look for in the next chief, and I think we've heard that in a lot of ways as well. So I want to make sure it's all covered. Is there anything else the city manager should consider when selecting the next police chief? Yes, you sure can.
You know, I do a lot of nosing around in the internet, and one of the things that really strikes me is whenever they're going to do a gang roundup, I'll check the arrivals at the jail, and then 3 days later, they're discharged. No charges filed. Fresno B said, oh, they arrested 335 people, but they don't talk about the discharges. So I don't want no phony arrest, because that's illegal detention. That's an illegal detention, and it takes a lot because it puts a record on our children, and that's the pipeline that takes them to prison. So that would save us a lot. So the cops need to really wonder what their emphasis is going to be. When they do gang roundups, if they're bad, arrest them, but follow through. Don't just arrest them, take them to jail for 3 days. You know, we need space in that jail. We don't need to be overcrowding it on fake charges. These videos, brother had a good idea. These videos should be shown to the person that wins or is selected. He should understand where the community is coming from. And stop using the same services that have failed. You know, sending people to the mission for the drunk tank didn't work. And now he's going to send people that are intoxicated. It's happened before and it didn't work. So let's learn. Let's look outside the box. Because those people in the mission are getting paid and they're failing us. It's just a shelter. It is not a home. So we need to redefine what we're going to do. And Dyer leads the pack by saying we're going to take them to, and the mayor, we're going to take them to the jail, to the mission. The mission does not accept my clients who are on antipsychotics, nor does the Salvation Army. So that's already a failure for some of our people. The other thing is, and I'm going to suggest, that if there are going to be lawsuits against the police department and we win, if they're going to appeal, that the money comes out of the department if they lose. Because I'm getting sick and tired of having to pay lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits. For example, when the deputy chief sued the chief of police for being racist. That lawsuit cost us over $1,200. The deputy chiefs only got $100,000, their lawyer got $100,000, but Dyer's attorney got over $800,000. Now, why did they settle? Let's take it to court. Let's find out what the real story is, because we know he's damn racist. I don't care if he tells me he's married to a Mexican. We know his policies are racist. So I am advocating real strongly that if they lose at the Court of Appeals, like in Shane's case, this last one they appealed, that it come out of the department.
Thank you. And I saw a hand right here. Hugo.
Yes, my name is Hugo Morales, and I live in the neighborhood. Jackie, you run by my neighborhood almost every day. So thank you for facilitating this. So I live on Terrace and Van Ness area, and so which is a couple blocks from here. I want to address the qualities of the candidate for police chief of Fresno. One, I think he should not be a politician. Two, that person should appreciate, and I mean a person, should appreciate the race diversity of our city and the demographics. That includes young people. The majority of the folks here in Fresno are people of color, I think close to 80%. The chief should understand that. And the majority of people here are poor, they're low income. That's a reality. If that person doesn't want to deal with poor people, the person doesn't belong in the city. That person, the qualities, should believe in alternatives to prison for nonviolent offenses. Prison is not the solution to everything. Believes that children do not belong in prison. We do not need children in prison. They don't belong there. That person should not make political endorsements. Also, that person should believe in community policing and should believe in the community. And that person should not demonize gangs. These are human beings. If they do something wrong, of course, they should be approached appropriately under the law. that person should believe in the safety of, should believe in a police review committee, citizens review committee, like in other cities. That person should be willing to work with the citizen review committee and respect it. 8, that person, or as a police chief, should not interfere with the judicial process by trying defendants from the chief's bully pulpit. That's not the role of police chief. And there should be no collusion with ICE. That's not the role of a police chief under the state law. And there should not be any criminalization of the poor, which is the majority population of our community and citizens. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Additional comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening, Andy Levine with Faith in the Valley. I want to echo a lot of what Hugo said. I shouldn't have followed him probably, but especially his call for a strong, effective Citizens Review Board with actual oversight and teeth, something that's stronger than what we have in place currently, where we have folks that are connected to the community that actually are able to weigh in and make concrete recommendations to the city, not to the police chief, but to the city to actually execute and exercise their oversight over the police chief in Fresno PD. And then secondly, so we've had a presence at all 4 of the community meetings so far, and a theme that's come up consistently, one of many themes, is what I've heard so far tonight too, is a really strong desire that our chief not be in politics, that the chief actually not be allowed to engage in political endorsements, whether they be ballot initiatives or candidates. Specifically, folks are very concerned about the chief's opposition to Measure P last year as a missed opportunity to actually invest in alternatives to law enforcement. And so the recommendation has been made that the chief be actually prohibited from the city manager from being able to make political endorsements. And I'd actually love if the city has an update on that from last week's meeting and whether they're able to do that from the police union.
All right, thank you, Andy. I do want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak.
I was just going to move on because you had moved on to questions 3 and 4, and I thought we were just doing 1.
I did,
so I wanted to
yes.
come back and talk about 3 and 4. So, again, qualities to me is I would hope they have their ability to find a leader who has the strength to address all of the issues that everyone at this meeting has brought forward today in that recruitment process. And what I would like to hear come back from these meetings is actually, here is what we're going to look for in our next police chief based on all of those meetings, so that the community then knows if they were heard and how they were heard. I don't know if that's something that is going to happen or not. And then I think someone who can collaborate, learning about all of the nonprofits and local organizations who can provide services in order to save money. There's a lot of wisdom coming out of everyone in the meeting. I'm learning some stuff today, that someone who's willing to collaborate, to be transparent and meet everyone where they are, is someone who can be successful, as well as do that and set an initiative internally for the department if they're coming from within department or from outside of the department. They're going to have to be strong and say, here's what I expect in policing in Fresno, and here's what our culture is, and here's where we're going. And from the top down, drive that through the organization and not relent. And if someone can't do that, change won't happen. So they have to be someone who can take that and have an initiative and lead that change from the top down within the police department as well. And so I would say that's what the city manager needs to consider and look for in the next police chief, is someone who can take those things and find that in order to bring about hopefully what's happening at other meetings, but what I'm hearing from this meeting in terms of what people would like to see in their next police chief.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm appreciating that you're addressing these questions. I have this gentleman here, and then this gentleman, and this lady. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Elliot Balch. I live downtown. And I feel like, there are different qualities of leadership needed in different seasons. And I feel like we're in a season where there are folks who have a lot of, who have, it's a time for new ideas about the relationship between the community and the police, the way policing's, the philosophy and the strategy of policing. There are questions about issues of, questions about corruption in the department. And then also, I think issues about that need a hard look about the kinds of stresses that our officers are exposed to, the kinds of services that we end up dealing with as law enforcement that are really about mental health and other issues. So it seems like we're in a season where we need to have space. It's sort of like in finance, like sometimes you have, the accounting department, but then once a year or so, there's an auditor who comes in, and their charge is to look kind of removed from the day-to-day decisions that have been made and think differently and have the freedom to sort of take on the assumptions that have built up over time in how things are done. And they may make some enemies along the way. And I think we're kind of in a season where the city manager should be thinking about a chief who's able to come in and do that and has the backing to ask tough questions, knowing that they might ask tougher questions if they're not expecting to be around forever. And maybe that they are then able to turn over a department that's had a lot of these questions answered, that's had some sunlight brought in, where the community has confidence in the answers that have been unearthed, so that then the next chief over time.
Thank you, Elliot.
I have questions about the procedure. I didn't get here right when things opened up because there are no signs out there telling me how to get to the right place. So maybe I missed what was talked about first. But I'd really like to understand how the decision will be made. It's my understanding it will be done by the city manager. And so where's the connection? Where does the city manager come in with all this information that people are sharing? How much of this information becomes part of the process?
So we do have some city staff here, and but we'll take questions right at the end so that we can get as much testimony. So please stay, and let's get all the input on these 4 questions, and then we'll pose that question. I want to make sure that we are able to get everyone's input and comment. This is a listening time, and you're doing really well at it. Any other comments on all 4 of these? Challenges you'd like to see the new chief address, issues facing the city that the new chief needs to be aware of and understand, and there's been some really good overviews of these. Important qualities for the next chief, and then finally, anything else that the manager should consider when selecting a chief. You want to add something, Jamie?
J.D. McCubbin, 93704. And I'd like to put 1 and 2 together because I think they're just the opposite sides of the same coin. So,
JB, please speak right into that microphone.
So lack of trust is certainly one thing when you have a history of, among other things, I'm not going to go down a list, but you've got an assistant police chief that's arrested by the feds for dealing drugs. You have to say, how corrupt is the department? And any institution, churches, the bar, doctors, banks, they all have a loss rate. And so we have to get rid of the myth that all of law enforcement is honest. What is the normal rate of unsatisfactory people? How many sadists do you get out every year? How many violent people? How many PTSD people? How many drug addicts in law enforcement departments, including FPD, have to be gotten out of the department to have a good working department? It's just a normal loss rate. They're not all perfect. There's no communication. And a young woman earlier said she doesn't get an answer on her case. Nobody does. Whatever they resolve it, they don't call you up and say, hey, we referred it to the DA for prosecution, we've dropped it, we put it in the file. That should be a normal part of the process if they want community cooperation, and they ask for it all the time. They don't answer questions. So communication, lack of trust are 2 big issues, and I think the largest issue going forward is What is going to be the role of law enforcement in Fresno as the challenges of immigration, social breakdown, and climate change come in? You want a militarized department, or you want to solve problems? Particularly climate change. What is law enforcement in Fresno going to do to the increasing stress of climate change and preserving social order and peace?
Thank you, JD. Yes.
Bueno, yo quería enfocarme con las escuelas. Me gustaría que los policías se involucraran más en las escuelas.
I wanted to focus on schools. I would like the police department to focus, but to be more involved with the schools.
Yo tengo 2 hijos en el Distrito Unificado de Fresno.
I have 2 children in Fresno Unified.
Uno de mis hijos va a la middle school y específicamente en esta escuela ha habido muchas peleas.
One of my children goes to middle school, and in this specific school, there's lots of fights.
Los padres estamos preocupados porque llega la policía cuando ya pasó el problema.
The parents are worried because the police arrive after the fact.
Nosotros no queremos un policía que vaya a dar la vuelta nada más en la mañana y regrese en la tarde a dar la vuelta también.
We don't want an officer who just goes in the morning and then perhaps goes back in the afternoon.
Queremos un policía que esté las 8 horas durante la escuela, que esté cuidando a los alumnos.
We would like an officer to be there 8 hours a day taking care of the students.
Para evitar que pasen pleitos o problemas dentro del plantel escolar y también afuera dentro de la escuela.
To prevent fights inside the school and outside of the school.
Ya que en esa área se maneja mucha droga.
In the area where the middle school is located, there is a lot of drug activity.
Y la mayoría de los niños camina de regreso a casa y también a la hora de ir a la escuela.
And the majority of the children walk to and from school.
Entonces queremos que la policía se involucre más con el distrito de Fresno, trabajen juntos y para mejorar la seguridad también de las escuelas.
And we would like this, the police department to be more involved with Fresno Unified.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias. Other comments?
Good evening. I'm Beva Islas. I live at 2928 East Princeton, which is Central Fresno. And I think what I would really like to see in our next chief is a greater sense of responsibility to community, that he or she is part of community. And as part of community, they have a responsibility to advance peace, they have a responsibility to advance justice, and that they are a big part of ensuring that there is love in our community. I think if we could get a chief that would operate from that frame, that chief would know that they cannot police every situation, and that we need to work just as much at prevention, and that means investing in our parks, it means investing in our youth, that they would be an advocate for an equitable distribution of the resources that we as taxpayers contribute to them. So I would love to have them centered on those ideas so that they can be part of the solution finding and not just try to monopolize and gain all of the resources that are accessible in our community.
Thank you very much. Other comments?
Hi, this is kind of weird. You're up there, and then they're over there. Is there like a way? This way.
As long as you're in the microphone, that's being recorded so that decision makers or the process people, but you go ahead and talk to the folks.
Sure, this is very uncomfortable. I know many of you, and I'm really happy to see some familiar faces. My name is Carrie Lorena Ayala, and my pronouns are she or they. I live about a block from here. I grew up on Arthur and Princeton, very, very close to here. This is my neighborhood. This is my home. I've traveled globally, but this is where my heart is, and this community is incredibly important to me. I also echo the comments that were already made by some of our community members about the importance importance of the involvement and community in this process, and I hope that this doesn't end here. I know a lot of folks in the community who do advocacy work and who do work around developing conversations with folks who haven't historically been involved in the process. So while I do appreciate the quote-unquote transparency of having a meeting, I have questions about holding it in a basement where there's no cell phone service and no signage outside to let anybody know where it is, along with many other questions about this process. So while I do appreciate the fact that it's being televised and supposedly these comments are going to be included in the hiring process, I would love to see some of the comments that were already made about continuing to involve community after some candidates have been narrowed down along with that. And then I went ahead and I wasn't planning on coming tonight. A friend told me she was going to bring me something, and so she roped me into being here. But you know, hearing what I've heard, I just wrote down some things. So I think that it's important for us, as far as the challenges that are being faced, to acknowledge that we're living in amongst the legacy of 500 years of colonial relationships rooted in ill-gotten gains of slavery and indigenous land and life theft, and that if we don't have leadership who can even acknowledge that that's a truth and that that's a reality of the community that we live in today, that we're going to continue to have the same kind of serious problems, not only with violence in policing, but also with the segregation of the community and the lack of participation in the process, because the people have absolutely no faith in the process because they have no reason to. I also want to address the issue of policing on campuses. This is actually an issue near and dear to my heart. It's actually a lot of the work that I do. And while I respect the parents in the room and the input that they have about more policing, I wish that the truth was that policing equals safety, but the reality of the situation is that it does not. When we have police on campus, our Latino students are 3 times more likely to end up arrested, which means that they are on campuses not diffusing situations, but actually making it a more dangerous place, specifically for our Black and brown students, our queer students, our students with disabilities, our foster students. We have many, many folks here in town who need additional resources, and rather than putting additional resources toward those folks, we're using funds from the state and locally that are intended to support them and actually policing them and making them more likely to end up incarcerated in the long run. And so I would just like for that to be addressed, and something that's like in the consciousness of the new police chief. As far as qualities that this person should have, I would really love to look into the eyes of another human being and be able to see that they're a human being first, and that their job doesn't define who they are. I really don't want to see the dead-eyed, non-listening look of somebody who doesn't really care about what I have to say and has already decided who I am based on where I'm from, who I'm affiliated with, and is not capable of listening to the experiences, the lived experiences that I and some other folks in this community actually have. I would like to see that person acknowledge the truths that exist outside of their current understanding, so I would like somebody who's open-minded. I also heard somebody mention educated, and that can mean a number of things, right? So I would like to see somebody who has a background not only in criminology. I've heard some, I didn't study criminology, I studied literature, but I've heard some really disturbing things about the history of criminology as a discipline and the development of it, and the perpetuation of systemic racism and other types of oppression. And so I would really like for this person to be well-rounded and to have some other ways of connecting with folks beyond policing that comes from a place of fear. Let me make sure that I checked off everything. Also, so I'm from here. And you know, you hear rumors, you hear talk amongst the folks, and I remember there being a newspaper article, but I can't quote it, and my phone's not working because of the no service thing, so I can't say for sure. But allegedly, the current police chief is actually a rapist.
So I think what I really want is for folks focused on what we want.
Sure.
Whatever
right, so,
it is, but I think we were focusing on what we want.
Sure. So, in mentioning that the current police chief is an alleged rapist, as somebody who has experience in this community and who knows a lot of people who have been sexually assaulted and also follows the news and has also been in the school situations where we have a lot of youth whose relationships with trusted adults are being regularly violated. We have teachers and coaches who are being arrested for things like statutory rape. If and when we've got folks who have a history of criminal behavior that they're now persecuting members of the community for, I would like for there to be some degree of accountability for that and some conversation that's happening around that. So if we have folks who have these issues in their past, that they're not just asking for mercy from the community for themselves and justice for everyone else. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Other comments? I have 2 folks coming forward. I'm going to start here and then you. Okay, thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Selena Rojas. So I would like the new police chief to understand that SROs make us students feel like criminals instead of making us feel safe. I also want he or she to look more into youth crimes, not automatically arresting them or jumping to conclusions. That meaning to figure out why they're doing what they're doing instead of jumping to conclusions saying, this person's a criminal. And to conclude, I don't want SROs on campus. They're just they never even do their job and they never take things seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Grecia Lanes, a lifelong South Fresno resident. So I think some of the challenges and issues I think the new police chief should be aware of is and should address is really addressing the issues that there's several issues that the city of Fresno addresses has. So the person just needs to be much better at holistically approaching whatever issue it is and not just money grabbing and 50% of the general fund of our sales tax and property taxes are going to the police chief, whereas we have nothing going to minimal kind of a small penny. They're going to parks and not only our general fund, but then I think as some other folks have mentioned, we're taking money from the school districts, having police on campuses. We really need to address these issues more holistically and recognize that we need to not just be reactive and think that having more police officers is going to be the solution. But no, we need better communities. We need access to a better education. We need youth to have opportunities outside of that. And so I think that's something that they just need to address. And I think someone mentioned it earlier as, being very, creative with how they use their funding sources. They don't need half of the city's budget to do whatever it is that they're doing. I recognize that, it's a difficult job. Not everyone can be a police officer. Not everyone wants to be a police officer, but at the same time, you are protecting us, you are serving us. So let's be more holistic about it. And as far as someone who I would want to be the next police, I would like to see someone like me. Someone who's a woman, a person of color, preferably that grew up in South of Shaw, considering 2/3 of the city is found South of Shaw. So someone either from South of Shaw or currently lives there would be great, because that way they have a real understanding of the day-to-day things that we're facing on a daily basis. So that would be really great if we can prioritize it. And as we're selecting the candidates, making sure that the candidates are reflective of who we are as a community. So that means majority of those candidates should be people of color. Majority of those candidates should should be living from South of Shaw. Majority of those candidates should have faced some type of, issues like most of us have faced. This community is a low-income community, so we need to be able to address those issues, and they need to be able to connect with us, on that level. So, making sure that this next police chief is not just another, face there that, will post themselves on these giant billboards and spend who knows how much money, with their face on these. I was like, I think that really speaks to how the person sees themselves, where they posting themselves on these, along these major corridors. So really having someone that understands us, that will address these issues and not just be another face there and pushing, whatever political agenda that they have and whatever political aspirations that they may or may not have. So
thank you very much.
Felicia Espinosa, 93704, but I'm for the most part, lifelong Fresno resident up 93710 and 93725. So I have actually lived in all parts of Fresno. Just to start off, I think I want to start off in terms of what the city manager should think of when selecting the next police chief. I think it's important to remember that the city manager is actually the one, she or he is the decision maker when it comes here, and they're actually the employer. So when I see things like what happened with Arambola and the police chief, and the hurt that the police chief is doing that in terms of attacking somebody, it also is the city manager who should be involved in those conversations, because currently it is her job to hold somebody accountable, and including Mayor Brad. So when it comes to accountability, it goes beyond the police chief. It also goes to the people who are his or her boss. So we want to make sure that these conversations and this authenticity and accountability includes both the position of police chief, but also includes City Hall in terms of being accountable to what the community concerns are and what the community is requesting and demanding. I also want to make sure that when it would be nice in terms of like what I'm hearing in terms of the budget, about 80%. 80% of it currently goes to the police chief and his or her direct reports, but it would be nice if not just in terms of prevention, but if it is that somebody's involved in the criminal justice system, afterwards in terms of helping them reintegrate into the community, making sure that they get what they have when we have family separation, when CPS is involved, when it is that they're going to have to go back to expungements for cases that they may have been system involved 10, 15 years ago, and they still have to go back to court and find the mechanisms to get back to court for something that we, as they should be able to just move on. And if it was the police, when it comes to accountability, if they do something wrong, it's forgiven then and there or within a couple of years. But if it's part of our community, it takes decades before they can go in front of court just to get something expunged. I also want to make sure that hopefully there is some transparency that goes beyond just these community meetings. That it includes just also being part of that interview of the police chief, but also going forward that there should be transparency when it comes to the police in our community in any and all ways. When it comes to the committees that the mayor will make, that we have community involvement and transparency of what decisions are being had there and the communications that are being had there, that it doesn't just go on these reactionary, like we have a police chief, let's have some community involvement. Well, it's an ongoing decade involvement and work, and it's going to take generational, and it's going to take a shift that includes City Hall in order to make the changes that the community is demanding, and that it goes beyond just requiring whoever the police chief to change his or her practices, that it includes their bosses as well. Yeah. And the last thing I want to make sure is in terms of that we have community involved, that we start talking about criminalization of the poor. So, there was a lot of discussions when the city of Fresno literally decided to criminalize the poor, but we still have that happening. We as a city charge misdemeanors when it comes to people, when it comes to shopping cart violations, when it comes to people taking recycling cans just to be able to feed themselves and being able to bring those in to make some money. Those are charged as misdemeanors. We're criminalizing the poor and we don't talk about it, and I'm hoping that the police chief realizes and moves beyond that and has been able to push and make those changes so that we stop putting people in perpetual criminal justice system and not being able to move on and to be part of, we're all part of Fresno. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. You should speak.
I really like your hair. I'm also here because I believe this will not be a waste of my time, and I think a measurable metric will be some demonstration of transparency on behalf of the police force here and going on into perpetuity, but also I think the city manager can also be transparent in the metrics they're going to be using to ultimately hire the next police chief. I think the issue of trust and not trusting the police force is a symptom of a much larger issue of distrust, and particularly even with the city council here in the city of Fresno. And so I think one way to damage further that trust would be not transparent in the hiring process. Secondly, I also used to work in education and was a high school teacher, and I think the police chief should also prioritize staying off of school campuses and ultimately shifting focuses onto issues like racism in the city of Fresno, whether it's a neighbor reporting racism from another neighbor, whether it's vandalism, spray painting swastikas, throwing feces into another yard. I think there's other issues besides gang activity and homelessness that also negatively affect the community health here in Fresno. Anyone who's been to a protest in the last 2 years have seen that Ben, whatever his name is, who's filming everyone and antagonizing folks as well too. So I think the issue of racism should be taken on more seriously by the local police, but also I think racism perpetuated by the department as well. I can go on and on, but I will not. I think also another issue that the police chief should be addressing is pollution, not, again, refocusing on activities that have a major impact on society aside from just making money for prisons. And then finally, I think it's really unprofessional and really an abuse of public funds to have a police chief be engaged in the political arena. I'm not going to take side on whatever the legislator is, whatever he's doing. If he, yeah, you know, I'm not on any side, believe me. But if a police officer is really up to this, he should be spending less time with the decision makers and more time with the people who are affected by the decision, really. And I think that's very telling of his priorities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Still have a little time. Are there any other comments you'd like to offer? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jeremy Miller, and I reside just about 10 minutes away in the 93702 zip code area. So another, I guess this would be answering number 2, and I probably will answer the rest also. So what issues facing the city should the new police be aware of and understand? I was a part of the co-creation of a youth advisory council for the police chief. So one thing I would love the new police chief to be aware of is that it exists, but also that it should not be completely run by the police. Unfortunately, as time went on, there was kind of a disconnect between the communities involved in it, the youth involved in it, and the police kind of just took it over. That was not the original intention of that youth advisory council, and to my knowledge, I don't know anything of it, and I was one of the co-creators of it. So that just kind of goes to show what's kind of happened between that idea, which was a great idea, and the communities involved. So one thing I would love to see is the police chief kind of go back to that, see who had an input in that, and reinstate it in a way that is actually helpful to our community, especially to our youth. And while we're on the topic of youth, it's kind of already been brought up, the SROs in schools, and it kind of goes back to also the usage of resources that the city, state, and I mean, anybody who has financial burden to the constituents of our city, we need more resources for our youth in schools. Prevention, not intervention, not cops showing up after a fight's happening, but a psychologist who can talk to the students and help them before a shooting happens, before a stabbing happens, before a fight breaks out. Whether it's just a mental issue, we need to be able to support our children in a way that they feel safe and cared for. I know the young lady came up earlier and said she does not feel safe around SROs. That needs to be addressed, period. There's nothing more important than our youth. And that our police chief needs to take that, honestly, that needs to be one of the most important qualities I see from our police chief, is the importance and the care of our youth here in Fresno. As far as the city manager, they should consider that they are also held accountable to the city. And so not just selecting the next police chief, but holding them accountable, they are also accountable. And whoever their, I guess, boss is accountable as well. So as we are talking about accountability, we're talking about the police chief, but in the same breath, we're also talking about the institutions that support and are a part, or I would guess say the umbrella of the police chief. So that would be the whole city council as well. Also, I think one thing I would also like to say is, though we're asking questions, these are more demands from our city. These aren't just like, well, include us. These are more demands. So we will be a part of the process one way or the other. And so I just want to also allow that to be said. And yeah, clap if you agree, or come up here and say that as well. But we've been asking for many things for a while. And so it comes to a point where us as a community, we're ready to move forward. And so we would hope that the police chief and that the city and everybody involved would want to move forward with us. But I think it's kind of gotten to a point now that it's like we're moving forward. And so we just want that to be said, and we want that to be echoed, and we want that to be understood, that we are here and we would love to work together, but at the end of the day, we are moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Additional comments? Yes. Hi.
Hi, Maya Flores, south of Shaw. So there's a couple things I wanted to say. One is the law that recently was passed about transparency so the public can view previous complaints against a specific officer. In other cities, they've been shredding records and any time before that law passed. So I want no records shredded. I want all records available retroactively. And I want full transparency, maybe a database that we can look at online. Also, if the candidate for police chief has any allegations in his past, any time in his adult life, that would constitute a felony, such as assault, domestic violence, or statutory rape, the community should meet and be the ones to decide if we want to proceed with that candidate. Also, about ShotSpotter, the artificial intelligence thing that can locate when a gunshot has been fired. We spend millions of dollars on that every year. I think that takes a huge chunk of community taxpayer money. And that money should have been spent on community relations, because the reason nobody calls the cops is because we don't trust the police. We're afraid of police brutality. We're afraid of being charged with trumped up charges, and we don't call the police. I live on Olive Street, and on New Year's a couple years ago, there was over 100 shots fired in my neighborhood, and nobody called the cops. I didn't call the cops, nobody called the cops. And that's because we don't trust the police. The money that's invested in ShotSpotter should be redirected to community relations, mental health crisis training for police officers, de-escalation training for police officers, and cultural sensitivity training for police officers. We should stop policing the homeless over the presence of tents, over them panhandling, and over them sleeping in the streets. Yes, so also the last thing is, do not collaborate with ICE. Do not.
Thank you, thank you. Other comments? Coming forward? Thank you.
Yes, Rebecca Rangel again. I actually live about 2.5 minutes down the street, 04. You know, as people are talking, one thing that really, I guess you don't have to look at me, right? I'm going to talk to the community here. That really stands out for me is the city budget. 80% of the budget goes to the police department. Who's keeping track of that money? Can someone tell me that? Because I go to sleep every night wondering, I wonder how much Fresno has spent. For example, my favorite number are the lawsuits against Fresno PD. It's in the millions. I don't even know how many millions of dollars, but a lot of money. Back to spot shooter, the thing I dislike about it, even though it's good to know, I trust the police to a certain extent, because we have shots fired in my community and we call the cops and they show up and they stop. So, you know, I think it's important to trust your police department. I don't think they're all bad. I think there's a few bad apples and they need to be weeded out. But back to the budget, I'd like to see accountability on the city budget, especially in reference to the PD, because I see a lot of trips being taken, a lot of trips, because the police department talks. And there are people in the loop that tell me, oh yeah, well they went to a conference in Las Vegas. I hear that a lot, by the way. So I'd like to know who's keeping track of the money. I'd like to know how many millions and millions of dollars over the last, let's say 15 years, because the last count in my head was about $38 million, but that's not counting legal fees. And then last but not least, cultural diversity training. Absolutely, without a doubt, from the top to the bottom and back up. There's got to be an awareness of working with people of color. There just has to be. And the change is coming. A couple of people have already said it. Look at our city council. You even hear people north of Herndon bristling. Crazy people like Brandow and those kookaburds talking about, they're taking over. They're reeking with their ugliness. So I'd like to see more of that coming forward.
All right, thank you. Other comments to kind of wind up your thoughts about these questions? And then we have a process question that's pending that we have some members of staff that may be able to give us a little information on that. Haven't heard from you yet, and then JD, if you want one final comment. Yes.
Dr. J, thank you for hosting this meeting and moderating. One of the important challenges that any police chief has is the history of the city or the jurisdiction that he or she is walking into. City of Fresno has a very colorful history in terms of policing, from being the bootlegging capital of the world during Prohibition, to having a police chief whose wife was a madam, and those sorts of matters are looked at not only from the inside, that is the city of Fresno itself, but by people from the outside. So the first thing that the chief of police, whomever he or she is, needs to know is that there is a great deal of history in this town towards illegality by the police department itself. The other matter is, how are we going to attract somebody from the outside that's ready, willing, able, and exceptionally well qualified to come in to the city of Fresno and become able to deal with all of the problems that we have in this city? Everybody's noticed that there are dozens of problems that the police chief is being requested to deal with. Some want a lot of transparency, but they also want less public relations on the part of the police chief. So most places have a public relations officer that deals with those. Other problems we have is, it's very clear, at least to the people who are suffering it, that there's a lot of racism in this city. Not just in the city, but in the central San Joaquin Valley as a whole. So the new police chief is going to need to deal with that challenge as well, that racism plays a very active part in policing in the city of Fresno. The other part of the city of Fresno is the history that it's had with police chiefs, at least in the last 37 years. Chief Max Downs was the police chief when there were 4 very young Chicanos who were killed south of Olive Avenue, where the same similar acts that were taken north of Shaw, the police were able to bring those kids down, one from a roof with a gun that was threatening to kill himself, and others with weapons. Those white children were able to be talked to, and a lot of time was spent, a lot of patience was used in order to get those kids from being killed. That doesn't happen over here. One of the problems is that when the police use deadly force, they are allowed to go back in time and justify their deadly force. Not in an objective way, but it's what the subjective opinion is of the officer at the very moment or before they shoot. So that is one of the challenges that not only the Fresno PD has to deal with, but law enforcement in general, but it's really very prominent here in the city of Fresno. So if we're going to have a police chief that's exceptionally well qualified come to the city of Fresno from the outside, it's going to be an important person who almost has to be, what is Superman? One of those people that have superpowers. We're asking for that person to have something like a PhD in psychology or that sort of person. So it's very difficult for us to attract somebody from the outside. Part of the history of the city of Fresno was when Max Downs left the police department, he was replaced by Chief Joseph Samuels, an African American. And most people don't remember, but the police officers themselves worked to stymie Chief Samuels from carrying out his duties. Some might even call it sabotaged. And so we are challenged by having the rank and file police department very ingrained in their culture that prohibits them from following somebody from the outside in a ready, willing fashion. The other matter is the way that the police chief is looked at in this community is almost as if it's a person that cannot do wrong. And if the present police chief is going to be replaced by somebody who's going to be respected by the majority of the community, then it's going to be difficult to find somebody from the inside who's going to be respected by the community stepping into those shoes. And the people that we have who are possibly ready, willing, able, and qualified that are already in the inside of the police department are Chief Pat Farmer, Andy Hall, Lydia Carrasco, you have Mark Salazar. These are people who have grown up in the police department. And so it's a real interesting dynamic that the majority of them are going to retire very soon, so it only leaves one of them who is far from retirement, but yet is in the culture already that we're not really having, the people of color are not really having a lot of confidence that our police department or our police chief are understanding that there's a lot of racism in the way that the police department carries out its duties, or certain police officer carry out his duties. So the last thing is, what does the manager need to know? Well, the manager needs to know that a meeting like this, where you have a good amount of people of color present, is a really good thing. And it not only allows us to use our freedom of speech and have a safety valve so that the community is able to weigh in, but it also allows the city to say, well, we let them have an opportunity to speak, and here it is. So this should not be an isolated or a short-lived matter that occurs. Perhaps we ought to have, on a constant basis, meetings of this nature that are well publicized, that were really well directed at where we're supposed to be. The groundskeeper gave me a ride over here in his limousine, and so I was very happy about that. Now, the matter is, it depends on where you are in the city as to the culture of that community. But we need to develop a community culture as well. So not only is the mayor or the manager or the chief of police or the city council responsible for governing our city, but also to develop a culture that we believe in our police department, that we believe in our government officials, that we believe in our justice system, and we believe that not only are the majority of people in our jail or in our prisons all people of color, but that they are not going to be selected out by the police for sabotage over time and again by being stopped by the police or the sheriffs or being surveilled by other governmental agencies just because of the way they dress or how they talk or what their color of their skin is or how much money they have or whether they have a home or not a home. This is very complicated. It's not a minor problem here, and it's not a minor problem anywhere else, but it all seems to, this could be the center of gravity of what's worse in the United States of America in terms of poverty. And so this is a major challenge for the manager, the mayor, the city council, and for our new chief of police. It was brought to our attention by Andrew Jans that maybe we should have, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Dr.
No, go ahead. I don't want to stop you, but I want to make sure you make your points. But then there are a couple of others, and then it will be time to wrap.
Okay.
So I want you to get your point in.
Okay, well, you know, the matter was whether we should ease into it. As I indicated with Chief of Police Joseph Samuels, we tried to do that. We had similar meetings ahead of his appointment. When he was appointed, we then had additional meetings. But it was the rank and file, and maybe the fault of Chief Samuels himself, that their ability to get along just never occurred. And so we need to have a culture where we're not only going to be welcoming to our new police chief, whomever she is, but also that we're willing to have the rank and file try to tolerate the people in the city so that we start having a respect for the law. We start having an ideal of justice. And so I thank you very much, and I think we should have these all the time.
Thank you, Will. Thank you. JD, you wanted to make the last point? And then anybody else that want to make sure that you've got a point to make, especially if it's different than we've heard, because we're just about at our time.
93704. I forgot to mention homelessness, but I don't believe the police should be the primary solve. But right now, they are the gateway to social services. It's really a county responsibility, but the city's involved. But to look at the past, Chief Dyer has repeatedly said, because I've heard him say it, our policy is overwhelming force. And it's a statistics-run department, and we've heard again and again from people here, we're not calling in. I know that my neighbors, it's got to be pretty serious before they call the cops, but you have a department that's running on incorrect and false information. It's just a structural problem of how we get the community and the department, which is very, very segregated and separated for a long history that starts in Sacramento and culturally, but it's a problem to get that bridge built. But I would like to ask the city manager, if as a result of this meeting and the one that follows, if they're going to post on the city website the criteria they're using to select the new police chief. Not the individual scores, but what are you considering as qualifications and disqualifications? And how do we get that?
So JD, why don't you let me pose that question now? Thank you for your input. And there, a question has been raised about the process, and we have some staff folks here. Maybe you could maybe just give us a little overview of what's out there. I know that's come up. Thank you, Jeff.
Sure. Thank you. I'm happy to do that. And again, thank you everybody for being here this evening. From a process perspective, in terms of the qualifications, yes, that will be posted on the city's website. Not only the education and the experience requirements, but what we've heard here tonight, along with other qualities that we're looking to identify in the ideal candidate. All of that will be part of what is considered a recruiting brochure that will be posted and made available for anybody who would be interested in the position itself or any member of the public who would just like to know. From a process perspective, as we all know, we've retained a recruiter. That recruiter is an individual who's going to assist us with identifying qualified candidates. And it's very important that I think we all want to have qualified candidates, that ultimately our city manager who's here, who has been listening and is taking all this in as she attends all these meetings, will be considering all of the information brought forward. With that, the recruiter will be conducting a outreach campaign, will be placing employment advertising, and will be reaching out to individuals who are qualified and seek their interest in this position. She will then subsequently provide the city with a list of qualified candidates after she's confirmed that in fact they do meet the minimum qualifications and that they are quality candidates, and that there aren't any issues from a background perspective that she would have to address to make sure that they are individuals she would want to recommend for our city's consideration. After those recommendations are made, we will be conducting a series of panel interviews which will be comprised of individuals from the community. We have not determined who those community members are at this point in time, but there will be a cross-section of people from across the city to assist us in identifying the best candidates for this position. Those panels will narrow down the group of candidates to the top few, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, for the city manager's further consideration and further deliberation, and she may involve others at that point, or may not. But at that point in time, it's up to the city manager to conduct interviews and then make a decision, and then we would conduct a background investigation to determine, especially if we have somebody coming from the outside that we don't have any experience in terms of their own employment history. That background investigation will then be utilized to make a final decision as to whether or not we truly wish to offer that person the job. Is that person truly qualified? Will they meet our expectations not only for the city manager and the mayor, but of the community? We've heard a lot about expectations, and we want to make sure that we are meeting the community's needs. Okay. The question is, will a candidate have to complete a post-qualified background? And yes, those external candidates are going to have to, first of all, complete what's called a personal history questionnaire. They'll go through a background investigation, just like any other external candidate. Yes?
Determine who's on the panel.
The city manager and the mayor's office will be working to determine who's on the panel. As I said earlier, the manager and mayor's office has heard loud and clear. There is a definite interest of members of this community, members of this very diverse community, that they want to make sure they're heard. They want to make sure they have the opportunity to have input. And the mayor has expressed in no uncertain terms a desire to ensure a transparent process. Having said all that, there will be community members from across this community who will be involved in those interview panels. And I just can't identify who they are at this point.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
So what I'd like to say, and lots of folks have...
One more comment. You talked to the previous city manager. I met with, after one of the shootings that took place within seconds because they didn't speak English, and we had a couple of questions for Dyer, the city manager, the IPA, the independent police auditor. One question is, the IPA had said, cops, you're using too much lead. You know, you talk about climate change, bullets have lead. And it was ignored. And so we asked, that if there's going to be recommendations by the independent police auditor, that they be enforced by the new chief of police. The other thing I pointed out is that all those gang enhancements, charges that were put on people because of the stupid injunctions, ended up putting these kids in the system just because they know somebody that's a gang, they become an associate gang, etc. And that brought their ability to get jobs down. They weren't able to get jobs. So when for my culture is we're all connected. Everything's connected. So if I'm going to install a policy, I want to make sure that that policy is not going to hurt the future of Fresno. I personally blame Dyer and his people for instituting all those that have put our kids in an inability to get a job and thus messed up our economy. So I want to make sure that whatever policy the new chief of police is thinking about, that at least he sits with us. We sat with Dyer on a couple of policies, including the immigration one, and I tried to get him to think about the towing one and the impact on undocumented people who didn't have a license. And he just ignored me, and that's when I quit the Chiefs Advisory Board, and I called him a racist pig. So I want to make sure that whatever policies or recommendations that are being given by the community, and in good faith, that the new chief of police take our input before, and to think about what the consequences to the connection of that policy is going to be.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I just want to say again, first of all, thank you really for coming out, for actually exemplifying what you're asking for all of you being here, for speaking candidly, for showing respect for every speaker as you did. I'm going to remind you that there is this form, there are hard forms here. There's also online. I also want to say that thanks to Community Media Access Collaborative, CMAC folks, for not only are they taping all of these, they're already online. They're already, if you go on to their website, I've watched the other community gatherings. This one will be up. When will it be up? Tomorrow? Do you know the answer to that? They're busy, but it will be up. I'm sure by tomorrow, if not by tonight. So just once again, thank you so much for your interest, for taking the time, for coming out and being candid and reflecting exactly the things that you're saying you want in our community. Thank you so much.